Welcome, welcome, welcome this evening to my live interview with David Mike, who has an extraordinary story of his experience in the military and in Leavenworth and how he turned his life around, how he got into trouble. And it's just a really compelling story. He's got a book named Dishonor, and he's going to be able to tell you all about it. And so I can't wait for you to meet him. I will bring him right in here. Hello, David. Thank you for being with me today on this and doing this live interview with me. I appreciate it so much. So many people are intimidated by doing a live thing, and so thank you for joining me.
I appreciate you letting me talk to your audience.
Oh, I am honored to have you here because you have an extraordinary story. I loved reading your book. I know it's been a while, so I can't wait to hear some of the stories again that were in the book. So when we get started here, why don't you share with the people a little bit about what it was like growing up in your family and the Mike family?
So my dad was a career Air Force airman. So he got drafted in 1968 and then married my mom. And about about 9 months and a day later, I was born. So, but growing up, yeah, well, he was going off to basic training. And so, that's what happened. But I grew up with my father being in the military and being around the military. My grandparents were all military from World War II, and it goes all the way back to the Civil War. So there's a lot of military lineage. All my siblings joined the military, and so it was kind of the thing to do. And it was what I was really looking forward to. My dad was also a music director at the church we used to go to in South Carolina. So kind of grew up in a pretty strong faith home with a lot of time at church. We spent a lot of time at church because he was, did bus ministry and they did all these kids ministry and music ministry. And so we just spent a lot of time at that church. And then I have three siblings. And so, it was kind of a full house and lots of stuff going on there. And it was an interesting upbringing, being drugged around the world and seeing different things. I got to live in England and Germany and all throughout the South. Originally, I'm from Connecticut, but I've never even lived there. But I tell people that's where I'm from because that's where I was born. It's easier to just pick one place. And that was kind of what it was like growing up, just traveling the world and seeing different people and the different lifestyles and it just experiencing being a military kid. But that was my goal when I went to high school. I actually took our junior ROTC to get ready to go into the military so that I had kind of a leg up from having that training so that when I actually joined the military, I would kind of know what was going on and get a little bit of extra money from the time that I spent in high school doing that military training.
Awesome. What branch of the military did you decide to join?
I actually joined the Army. I felt like I needed to be a little different than my dad. I think you always want to branch out and be your own person.
Oh,
my dad was a little concerned about joining the Army versus the Air Force. I think I told him I didn't want to sit behind a desk, which now as I am older, I realize that not every Air Force person sits behind a desk. So it's probably a little bit arrogant to say
planes
that.
Too?
Oh yeah, they have all kinds of stuff, and and all branches are equally important, and they all have every job is important in order to protect this nation from the enemies, foreign and domestic. So yeah.
Oh, definitely. I have a nephew who was in the Air Force, so I understand that he's been in all different places around the world. Also, he's a weatherman in certain parts of it, which that's really important.
That's what my brother
doing certain
just
strikes
retired
and stuff, and he flew over. I don't even remember all the different places. He's done so many things I can't keep track of it all.
Right.
But he's retired from that now. But yeah.
Yeah, my brother is just retired as a weatherman as well. So
that's cool. Yeah. Well, after you enlisted in the Army, how did you get into trouble? You got into trouble in the Army, didn't you? And why don't you tell us what happened after you got into the Army?
So I had been in the Army for about a year and a half, and I had a relationship that I was in high school kind of fell apart. And so at 18, 19 years old, I was devastated, and my world was over. That's what happens when you're young and not really thinking. some of my friends decided to take me out and cheer me up. So we went out to some of the clubs nearby the Army post, and we weren't there too long. And but prior to this, I had never actually drinking alcohol or done anything like that before. So it was a little out of character for me, but somebody handed me a pill and I took it out of depression. And I don't even remember why I took it or how I made that decision, but I just remember taking it, and it was a hit of ecstasy. And that hit of ecstasy was so intense. You always say you remember your first high. It was something that I couldn't get enough of. And then after taking that first hit, I started to feel like I needed it more and more. So the more I went out, the more I took, and it started to snowball to the point where when I got to the club, I would beeline it to the person who I was buying it from. And all my friends were saying, wow, you got that pretty fast and you know where to get it. How about you just get it for us? And so everybody started handing me money. And I ended up going to the dealer, and I essentially became a dealer myself, kind of a middleman or middleman or end man. But I was getting it in quantity, and the person who I was getting it from was like, well, you're unloading it pretty quickly. How about I give you a cut? You sell this many and I'll give it to you for free. So the enticement of getting it for free was, I was hustling pretty hard. So, after a couple months, I was pretty much dealing drugs there, back at the barracks and everywhere. I was also continually medicating myself to the point where it was affecting my performance at work, and sometimes even at work I was high on ecstasy. So it snowballed pretty quickly. And then eventually I got caught. So the Army version of undercover cops is called CID. It's Criminal Investigation Division. Had been watching me and all the other people who were involved in this. And I was stationed at Fort Polk, Louisiana. And at that time in 1988, there was it was pretty rampant for people to be on drugs. And they captured me, and the guy told me, hey, you know what? It's your first offense. If you work with me, I'll work with you. I'm going to put you back in your unit and you kind of help me out and take some people down. And I was like, oh yeah, definitely. I was really scared to death of going to jail and didn't want to go to jail. So I said I would. And as soon as I got back to the barracks, I was like, nope, forget that. I'm not doing it. And I went right back to the same old stuff. And eventually the trailer that I was living in off base got raided, and right back in the office, he's like, yeah, I thought you were helping me out. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what happened. I didn't know that was going on. And so when they went back to my unit that night, a friend of mine who had gotten arrested escaped and told me to come get him. And I picked him up and I drove to Houston, Texas, and disappeared for 6 months. Never came back. Well, I came back, but as a dealer. So I moved to Houston, Texas, AWOL from the Army, and my unit moved to Panama during a combat movement. So in 1989, there was a Operation Just Cause, I believe it was called, and they went down there to capture Noriega. And so I missed a combat movement, and it was considered a higher charge in the Army. It's called desertion. And even to this day, on the record, you can still be put to death for that, which is a little scary. They don't actually execute for that, but just knowing that, it was kind of scary. So that's why I was in Houston, basically self-medicating, selling drugs to stay alive, and kept coming back to Fort Polk. Eventually I got captured again, and then I was in jail. So, that's kind of the bad stuff there that happened.
Yeah. Do you think that you did all those decisions, the multiple decisions that you made to not help the guy, and you're like, no, I'm not doing that, and then you drove off with your friend, and then you came back? Do you think that was motivated by fear or by addiction, or what do you think was the motivating factor do you think it was multiple things?
I would say it was multiple. The drugs and the multiple drugs that I was taking besides ecstasy, I started experimenting with LSD, cocaine, marijuana, like anything I could get my hands on. I was swapping and just did multiple in a night, sometimes maybe 2 to 3 different types of drugs. And so I would say it was a little bit of the addiction and the high, but it was mostly to escape reality. And I think I couldn't deal with pain and heartbreak and suffering and just basically reality. And once I was released from that through this self-medication, I could not come back down from any of that and deal with what was going on. And I think then it started to be the guilt of that had let everybody down in my mind, and I was leading this life that was not how I was raised or brought up. And so I think it was a combination between just escaping. I think escaping reality would probably be the biggest reason.
Escaping the pain and escaping the shame.
Yeah.
Trying to run away, outrun that emotion. Wow.
Right.
Yeah. So how did you end up in Leavenworth?
Well, after I was captured the second time, I actually ran away one more time, and I was released back to my unit. And it was interesting because they said, "Are you going to run if we let you back?" After I've been gone for 6 months, I'm like, "No, I'll be good." And first chance I got, I disappeared again. It was because my father was supposed to come to my trial, and I got a little bit nervous because I think with the timing, he wasn't going to make it, and I freaked out, so I ran away again to Dallas, Texas. And then after a week, I didn't know this at the time, but my parents found out that I was gone, and they had a whole bunch of people praying for me. And all of a sudden, I got this overwhelming feeling of I need to go back. And so I got a phone call from the cop who arrested me. He said, "If you turn yourself in, it'll be better." So I drove back and turned myself in. I had a court martial, and during the trial, I had to testify against myself and tell them all the things I had done. And based on that, and I actually helped out the cop that arrested me and did a few things in order to lower my sentence, which was a pretty standard way to go about it, so you didn't end up in jail for the rest of your life. I was facing 36 years, I believe, and I ended
36 years.
Yeah, with all of the combined, offenses.
Wow.
With desertion.
How old were you then?
I was in 20 when I had the trial. I was 20 when I had the trial. And I just
You were
turned 20.
21 years old?
20, yeah.
Wow, 20.
Yeah, so I got court-martialed, and in the court-martial is basically like a military court. They stripped my rank all the way down to nothing, and they took all my pay away, obviously, and then sentenced me to 5 years in prison, and then I was shipped off to Fort Leavenworth, which is the Army's maximum security prison.
Only for 5 years?
I had a 5-year sentence. I was facing 38, but because of the assistance that I provided, the
Gotcha.
judge gave me a little leniency. Had
That's
I not done that,
leniency, 36 down to 5.
yes, yeah,
That's a lot of leniency. 31 years is a lot.
Yeah. So I think I would have gotten about 13 years, which I don't know, who knows where I'd have been if I'd spent 13 years in prison had I not assisted. So I was thankful for that opportunity. And the cop who arrested me gave me a shot at a little bit of redemption before I learned about what redemption really meant. So I was thankful.
Wow. So how did you survive in Leavenworth? I can't imagine. Tell us a little bit about Leavenworth. It's just a big name to me. I have some pictures of it because of having read your book, it's written so well. I really love how you wrote the book. I think it's an excellent book. Why don't you hold up your book for the people who are watching now and show them your book? He has a book. We'll get into that more in a little bit, but he wrote a book called Dishonor. But in Leavenworth, how did you survive in Leavenworth? I mean, what was that like there? How scary was that? Was that the most traumatic thing that happened to you, or why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
I actually got moved around to quite a few different jails before I ended up in Leavenworth, and there was a couple local jails I had to go to, and a couple military jails. So when I got to Leavenworth, it was a little scary when I first got there because I didn't know what to expect in person. Because I had to testify in a trial at Fort Polk, there was a couple guys that also had to come back from Leavenworth who testified in the trial as well, who kind of gave one of the guys I used to run with. He gave me a little bit of a heads up, so I kind of had a little bit of an idea of what was going to happen when I got there, but it's different when you actually walk through those doors. But Fort Leavenworth is the U.S. Army's maximum security prison, and you go through this door, and they kind of like give you the rundown right there to kind of get you in a frame of mind. And then when you enter the prison, you got all these people yelling at you, saying all kinds of interesting things. And then you end up in solitary confinement for 30 days in order to kind of process in. So I was in
30 days all by yourself in a room?
Well, you do get out for lunch, and you do get out for classes. So there's classes on how to use the dining facility, how to use the medical facility, and then they kind of give you some tests and assessments to see if you need any education. And so you're not completely isolated, but you are in a cell underground for the majority of the time. And I had a lot of time to sit and contemplate what the heck was going on with coming down off all the drugs and just living inside of my mind with a lot of guilt and shame from the actions I had. So eventually I moved up in general population, and it was kind of interesting. There's about, I think it was about 250 inmates in one wing, I believe. I'm trying to remember exactly, but it's a lot of people. And I ended up on one of the top tears, and I was told immediately, one of the guys who ran into me said, you need to move down from there, you're in danger. So I immediately put in a request to move down. I was like, okay, I don't know what that means, but I'm moving down. So I moved down closer to the ground, and it was a lot of boredom. I know that sounds weird, but sitting in a cell with the door shut, you start to go a little crazy. We did have to work, so I ended up having to work. But the difference between Fort Leavenworth, the U.S. Army's prison, and other prisons is that there is a sense of discipline. Everybody there was in the military, so they had gone through basic training. Obviously, they were all criminals. Most of them were first-time offenders because you can't really have a record to get in the military. So there was some sense of discipline and a little bit of honor among thieves, I guess, is a good way to put it. But there was definitely some scary stuff. And I do think that overarchingly through this whole entire time, God was watching over me, and He had a plan for me, and it wasn't to be, messed with in prison, I guess, like I could have been. And it could have been different if I was in a civilian prison.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So how did you come out of all of this? How did you get your redemption, as you had mentioned earlier? How did you come out of this 5 years in there? How did you get out of the prison? And how have you're clearly doing different things with your life now. You're an instructor at a cosmetology school. You have a beautiful wife and children. And, no one's life is perfect, but thriving means that, you're living a good life and making better choices. So
Right.
How did you take ownership of your life? How did you reclaim your life back?
There was a few moments during the drugs where one time I overdosed. Another time I basically, God was watching over me. If you read the book, there are times, here's the book again, but if you read the book, I shouldn't be alive. There were some definite points where I pushed myself to the physical limits that I shouldn't be alive. And I even contemplated the second time I ran away by doing suicide by cop. I had a gun, and I said, if I ever get arrested, I'm just going to aim at the cops and go down. But God had a different plan for me. During the time that I was in prison, I had to take a bunch of classes. They had all these classes signed up that I had to sign up for. And in order to get parole or get out at all, you had to take these classes. And it was drug and alcohol related instances, Narcotics Anonymous, anger management, things like that. And I didn't think I was an angry person, but they made me take that class anyways. Reality therapy. So I guess I didn't have a good grasp of reality, which makes sense because I was trying to escape it. But I didn't get anything out of any of those classes. I was only doing them because I had to. I don't remember anything they taught me. But I had a moment where I was in prison for about a year and a half, and I was working in the dining facility, and a guy walks up to me where me and him were alone in one of the rooms, like mopping, and he sticks his hand out and he says, look, and he had 2 hits of LSD. And I was like, dude, where'd you get that? And I took one of them without even thinking. I don't even know if he was offering it to me or just showing it to me, but I took one on impulse. It had been clean for a year and a half. So I relapsed, and me and this guy were high, and nobody ever found out that we had done that. And I went back to
reading your book.
Oh, if you read the book, then you'll know. Yeah.
And listening to this podcast.
Yes. So, but the guards didn't find out, and we were able to pass through the day without being found out. So I make it back to my dorm room, for lack of a better word, and on the desk I had a letter from my dad because I was up for parole, and I was waiting for certain letters and paperwork to come in order to be considered for parole. And I opened up the letter from my dad, and it said that he would stake his job, his reputation, his life on the fact that I would never do drugs again. This is the same day that I relapsed. So I feel like God orchestrated that moment to show me, dude, you're really messing your life up. And if he had to put that up for collateral, you would have taken him out. So I decided from that moment forward that I would never do drugs again. And that was my defining moment. So any of the classes I went to, even after I got out on parole, I was told to go to AA, see if I liked it. I told him I don't need it. I'm done. I'm not doing drugs again. And my parole officer believed me and didn't force me to go. And I haven't, other than ibuprofen every once in a while and maybe some cold medicine. I've been sober for 30 years as of a couple months ago. So
wow, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's a big deal. I have a friend who helps moms of addicted loved ones, and she knows how hard it is for people to get clean of stuff like that and all that. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. And I've been told by a lot of people, law enforcement and things like that, that it's very rare for people to come out and not go back. And that's kind of one of the things I think that people are blown away by when they see kind of how quickly I spiraled down. And then there was just a decision, and it was a decision because I feel like God was orchestrating some things in my life to show me that, you know, he had a different plan for me than the one I was on, the one that I was trying, the plan that I was trying to live on my own terms. And
Yeah.
he definitely showed me a different path. So I'm really thankful for that as well.
That's awesome. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about how your book came to be? If I remember right, you didn't just sit down to write a book. It came about a different way. How did it come about?
I actually joined a Facebook group by a guy named John Acuff. He's a New York Times bestselling author, and he was working for the Dave Ramsey Company. Is another guy I follow, and he was talking about people trying to get together in a group and do something. And also, as a tangent, I kind of was involved with Jeff Goins, who's a writer. And every time I would tell somebody, oh, I expect my students, people I know, they would say, I've been in prison before. They're like, what, you? Are you serious? And I'm like, yeah. And I kind of tell them a couple of bits and pieces, like, you need to write a book. And I was like, I don't even know how I got out of high school, to tell you the truth. Just out of, I think I was a mercy pass. I was smart enough, but didn't do the homework kind of guy. And I was like, I don't know how to write. I don't know what I'm doing. And I would say that there's no way I could write a book. And so when I joined these groups, I had a couple of people say, you know what, if you want to write a book. So I said, this is my story. This is what I want to do. And they're like, this is what you need to do. You need to blog first. And so I set up a blog and I started writing like 1,000 words a week, just kind of what had happened off of memory. And then my mom gave me a stack of letters that I wrote to her the whole time I was in prison, and it gave me a chronological order of everything that happened. So I was really blessed to receive that, so I can keep everything in order and be honest and truthful. So I started writing that, and I started developing a following. And people who were reading my story started telling me that my story was resonating with them. They had a family member or a son or had gone through the same thing, and people started sharing it, and it started to grow. And it's not like it was blowing up the internet, but I was like, there's just a lot of people who are being helped by this. So I have to keep going. So it took me 3 years, 1,000 words at a time, week by week. And then at the end of that last bit of the story, I guess, I had enough to put a book together. So I compiled it all. I sent it to an editor, and then the editor compiled everything together and fixed it up and posted on Amazon. And that was about 5 years ago in August. So.
Wow. And so what is the subtitle of your book? It's called Dishonor, and what's the rest of it?
It's Dishonor, One Soldier's Journey from Desertion to Redemption. So it kind of summarizes the downward spiral of running away from God, life, my country, my family, and everyone, and then being redeemed by God's love.
That's awesome. How does God play into this story? How did you connect with him in this story? Where does that fit in?
So I was dealing with a lot of guilt and shame, and of all the stuff I had done. And there was a radio program I was listening to after I think about 2.5 years in prison, and I was listening to this radio broadcast, and it was a preacher named Bob George, and he said something that kind of blew me away. And like, I'd grown up in church, my dad was a music director, I said all that, and I'd heard all these big words like redemption, grace, and forgiveness, and I didn't know what really any of it meant, because I think I was mostly afraid that because of the way I was raised, and you got to get right with God, and you hear people saying you got to get right with God, you got to get your life on the right path, that I was going to get zapped for everything I did wrong, and God was just waiting for the moment to send down a lightning bolt, and boom, I'm gone. So that was my relationship with God, and I had all the head knowledge, but I didn't have the heart, the relationship heart thing going on. So this radio broadcast, Bob George said, how many of the sins that you committed were in the past? And I'm like thinking, that God died for, because God died for, or Jesus died on the cross 2,000 years ago, before we were born, and everything that he died for was in the future. He did it before we even knew we were going to be born, right? Or he knew we were going to be born before we were born, and before all the things that we did wrong, he still died for them before we did them, and he still died for them to take them all away. And I was like, that's just a different concept. And then the more I kept thinking about it, as I was reading through the Bible, I started seeing this come up over and over again. I was like, Jesus really did die for everything I was going to do before I did it. That's crazy. And so why would I want to keep continuing living like that? So it really opened up my eyes and helped me realize that I was forgiven. And the other thing he said was that if you did something wrong and you went to your dad and said, Dad, I'm really sorry, I did this thing wrong. And he said, you're forgiven, don't worry about it. But the next day I'm like, no, I'm still feeling guilty about it. Can you please forgive me? And he would say, no, I forgave you yesterday. You don't have to keep asking. And then the third day you come back and you're like, I am just really struggling with this. He's like, well, why don't you let it go? I already forgave you. So realizing that God forgave us already and just be thankful for it was another eye-opening moment for me. And so I really was glad to have heard that radio broadcast, and I ordered his book. Was called Classic Christianity. It kind of just describes grace in that way.
It's called what?
Classic Christianity by Bob George. And it's just talking about grace and forgiveness and what that actually means. And you don't have to keep begging for it all the time because it's been extended to you. It's a free gift. Take it.
Yeah, that's profound. A lot of people I know struggle with knowing about God. And I know, that I struggled with, thinking God was mean and bad and waiting for me to walk out of line just to zap me like you said.
Right.
So I could relate to that. And, coming to know that we're forgiven completely, fully, and His grace, how amazing it is. And, I just want to encourage the listeners here that if you know stuff about God and you think God's this mean, bad thing, to press into, maybe get that book that David brought up, or there's a minister that helped me called Joseph Prince, and there's lots of other ones out there. Grace is real, and press into that message and change your view, because God loves you right where you are right now, in whatever mess you're in. Right, David? He loved you right in the middle of your mess when you took that LSD on that same day. And when you went AWOL, He was loving you then. You just didn't know.
Yeah. And the whole time I was running, whether it be mentally, physically, He was chasing me down, and I didn't realize it and how important it was to Him for me to come back. So I am thankful for that. And I was so blown away by this book that I received in prison. I got a copy sent to me after hearing the broadcast, that when I wrote my story, I wrote it in the same manner so that people could understand the same grace and forgiveness, but from the perspective of somebody who went through what I went through. So I actually send books to inmates. Anytime somebody tells me they have a family member, a friend, or somebody they know in prison, or somebody struggling with the guilt and shame of their past, or struggling with addiction, I will send a free copy to this until I run out of money. I have a fund set aside, and if the money runs out, then I won't send them anymore. But the money just always is there, so it's really awesome. And so I'm willing to send a copy to anybody who feels like they need to hear it. And obviously, it's awesome if people buy it too. But I definitely am shipping books to inmates whenever I get the opportunity. That's wonderful. And you've spoken in prisons too, haven't you? I haven't spoken in prisons. I've spoken at a drug court, which is kind of like an adult's second chance. It's kind of like adult diversion. I've spoken churches and schools, but I haven't quite made it into prison yet. I can see why you might shy away from doing that. You lived there, so wants to go visit, right? Yeah, and I think that if the opportunity arose, but it seems like schedule-wise, it just hasn't materialized yet. Okay. I'll tell anybody my story. Okay. And it's not awesome. My story, it's His story, and I was just a part of it. The decisions I made led me to the path, but God helped me get back on the right path. Amen. Well, if people wanted to connect with you, how would they connect with you? What is your website that they could connect with you? So my website is dilemmamike.com. It's DILEMMAMIKE.com, or Dilemma Mike on any social media platform. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, I'm on all of it. So. Awesome. Well, thank you for being with us today. I appreciate you being just so candid and sharing things that could be so hard to share, being so vulnerable of things that are just so close to your heart. I just thank you for sharing with us today. Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to interview me. Oh, sure. And I'll be talking to you in just a minute. Well, thank you everyone for being with us this evening and hearing my friend David Mike's story. I was a part of the writing community with him. That's how I met him. I met him right after he published his book, and I have had the pleasure of being able to take some of his books to a prison. So if you know anyone who's in prison, take him up on his offer, connect with him, or just buy the book yourself to get into prisons to help people who are struggling with being in prison, or even with like drug halfway houses like he was talking about. If you know people, then share this information with them. And I just want to thank you for being with us today. I'm Danielle Burnock from DanielleBurnock.com. Love yourself from Survive to Thrive, that lady on the internet who loves you. Mwah.